Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we are going to start Unit 1, Realist and Non-Realist Approaches, and our topic is Key Concepts in the Realist School. We shall be focusing here on some of the key concepts frequently used in the study of international relations, which together form the very core of the realist school. These are national interest, national power, national security. Our use of these concepts so far has been rather loose, lacking a systematic treatment without which we cannot possibly capture the minute nuances of their implication in the realist tradition of international relations. However, you might have perhaps already noticed that some concepts tend to overlap and are often used interchangeably by the realist theories. Now we are going to discuss national interest as a key concept in the realist approach. From the perspective of the realist framework, the concept of national interest, notwithstanding its ambiguity, is considered to be the most important analytic category in explaining and predicting the course of international behavior. Pursuance of national interest as a foreign policy goal in the realist perspective is treated as the primary justification for all kinds of state actions. Almost all realists are unanimously on this. However, the real problem arises when one asks conceptual or substantive questions about the national interest. For example, can there be a universally acceptable definition of national interest? Does national interest keep changing as per time and space? Who decides what constitutes national interest at any given point of time? And how is it prioritized? Does national interest always represent the genuine interest of the nationals of a country? Is national interest the sum total of the interest of all the citizens of a country? Or is national interest merely an expression of the values of the political elite of a country? And so on. A review of history does reveal that different statesmen have justified their foreign policies in the name of the national interest. For example, Napoleon argued that he was acting in France's interest when he initiated the Russian campaign and when later he mounted a last desperate battle at Waterloo. Similarly, Hitler justified his expansionist policies, including a mindless multi-front war, in the name of Germany's national interest. In each of these and many other instances, we find statesmen justifying their diplomatic strategies in the name of national interest. Hence, Morgenthau has been a systematic and consistent supporter of the premise that diplomatic strategy or foreign policy should be motivated by national interest rather than by ideological considerations. He equates national interest with the pursuit of state power, where power stands for anything that establishes and maintains control by one state over another. He further adds that this power control relationship can be achieved by coercive as well as cooperative techniques. Morgenthau has been criticized for constructing two abstract and imprecise concepts, power and interest, which he used at the ends and means of the international political action. Morgenthau, however, has remained firmly in support of his position that great abstractions such as power and interest cannot and should not be qualified. Morgenthau believes that the political action is not finite, precise, and clearly observable. Therefore, if political concepts are to reflect accurately the hazy reality of politics, they must also be vague and imprecise. Further, the concept of national interest is intricately intertwined with the question of national survival. As Morgenthau puts it, the minimum requirements of the nation states is to protect their physical, political, and cultural identity against possible encroachments by other nation states. It is this sole objective of survival, argue Morgenthau, which justifies a whole range of cooperative and conflictive policies, such as competitive armament, balance of power, foreign and alliances, subversion, and economic and propaganda welfare. However, the realist understanding of the concept of national interest is not free from problems. It is, as critics argue, defined in a rather loose fashion, with the consequence that the pursuance of national interest does at times become a license for the continuance of aristocracies on the weaker nation. As a result, national interest more often than not is merely assumed rather than rigorously defined. For example, that national interest is a necessary criteria for policy appears too obvious, with the result that no one would ever argue that the state ought to act in opposition to its national interest. But then what constitutes national interest? As a matter of fact, those who rule may not follow policies that would necessarily lead to enhancement of national interest, but their own or class interest. Now, the next key concept is national power. The concept of power has conceptually proved to be an elusive category, lacking unanimity among scholars over its precise meaning. However, from the days of the Thucydides to the present, the concept of power has been identified with political action. Morgenthau, for example, defines politics as the struggle for power. In other words, power for Morgenthau symbolizes a relationship between two political actors, where actor A has the ability to control the mind and action of actor B. As he puts it, power is man's control over the minds and actions of other men. The realists make two important points about the concept of power. First, power is a relational concept, in the sense that one does not exercise power in a vacuum, but always in relation to another entity. And second, power is seen as a relative concept. What it means is that in an international system, it may not be enough to calculate one's own power capabilities, but also the power of other states. However, the task of accurately assessing the power of states presents a serious challenge. The challenge gets further aggravated as it is merely calculated in terms of the number of troops, tanks, aircraft, and naval ships that a particular country possesses. Calculation of power in this purely physical sense leads to further build-up of physical force with a view to outstripping the power of the perceived enemy country. This is done with the belief that it might enhance the ability of one actor to get other actors do something they would not otherwise do. This one-dimensional view of power, as understood by the realist, has been criticized on a number of grounds. Contemporary structural realists have in recent years sought to bring more conceptual clarity to bear on the meaning of power in the realist discourse. Kenneth Waltz, for example, tries to overcome the problem by shifting the focus from power to capabilities. He suggests that capabilities can be ranked according to their strength in the following areas: size of population and territory, resource endowment, economic capability, military strength, political stability, and competence. However, as critics point out, resource strength need not always lead to military victory. For example, in 1967 Six-Day War between the Israel and Egypt, Jordan and Syria, the distribution of resources clearly favored the Arab coalition, and yet the supposedly weaker side of annihilated its enemy's forces and seized their territory. The definition of power as capabilities has proved even less successful in explaining the relative economic success of Japan over China. Yet another problem with the realist treatment of power relates to its exclusive focus upon state power. For realistic, states are the only actors that really count. As a result, transnational corporations, international organizations, and religious dominations are really taken seriously in the realistic framework. Moreover, it is not clear that these non state actors are anonymous from state power, whether this be Italy in case of papacy or US in case of corporations like Microsoft. The extent to which non-state actors bear the imprint of a static as identity is further endorsed by the fact that these actors have to make their way in international system whose rules are made by the states. Now, next key concept is national security. From the realist viewpoint, the concept of national security or national survival is treated as a fundamental value in the foreign policy of all states. Particularly, classical realists like Machiavelli, Minsky, and Weber attach top priority to national security or survival. They stress that the task of ensuring national security or survival must be considered as the supreme national interest to which all political leaders must adhere. In other words, national security is viewed as a precondition for attaining all other goals, whether these involve conquest or merely independence. In the words of Henry Kissinger, a nation's survival is its first and ultimate responsibility. It cannot be compromised or put to risk, as also noted by the Waltz. Beyond the survival motive, the aim of the state may be endlessly varied. All other goals, such as economic prosperity, belong to the domain of what is called low politics and hence are considered of secondary importance. The primary concern of realists is ambiguity with the high politics, the security of the state. Given the obsession of the realist with the preservation of security, they emphatically recommend the leaders of their state to adopt an ethical code which would help them judge an action according to the outcome rather than in terms of a judgment about whether the individual act is right or wrong. Despite near unanimity among realists on the centrality of the issue of national security, recent development in the realist thinking indicate a raging controversy over the question of whether states are in fact principally security or power maximizers. This controversy, which primarily takes place between the defensive and offensive realists, has significant implications for the prospect of international peace and cooperation. Defensive realists such as Waltz and Griso argue that it is security which is the principal interest of the states and that they seek to obtain only as much power as it is sufficient to ensure their own survival. According to this view, states are primarily defensive actors and will not seek to gain greater amount of powers if that means jeopardizing their own security. Offensive realists like Mesher, on the other hand, argue that ultimate goal of all states is to achieve a hegemonic position in the international system. States, according to this view, always desire more power and are willing, if the opportunity arises, to alter the existing distribution of power, even if such an action may jeopardize their own security. Here we want to wind up today's lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.